You know, when you look at a traditional world map, the lines between countries just seem like so permanent.
Yeah, they really do.
Right. They look incredibly solid, almost like the load-bearing walls of a house. I mean, the basic assumption is that once you step inside those lines, the rules are clear and, you know exactly who is in charge of your reality.
Well, it gives us this very comforting illusion of absolute control.
Exactly.
The idea that inside this specific geographic polygon, a nation's laws are supreme, and outside of it, the chaos is just someone else's problem.
But then you actually sit down with the kind of source material we have today, which is a massive stack of daily news reports, editorials, and policy updates from late April 2026, and suddenly those solid black lines look incredibly porous.
Oh, completely.
You realize that a single policy shift thousands of miles away can instantly dictate, like, what you pay for groceries, or that a few lines of code can just bypass a heavily militarized border entirely.
It forces a complete rethinking of what sovereignty even means in a hyper-connected world, because the walls simply aren't as thick as the maps suggest.
Right. And we are thrilled to have you here with us to unpack all of this. Today's deep dive is a comprehensive look at how these boundaries are shifting. Whether you are a dedicated UPSC aspirant, a policy wonk, or just someone who wants to understand the world, this is for you.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. And just to be completely transparent with you up front, the sources we are looking at today contain some highly charged political development.
Yeah, very charged.
We're talking about controversial state-level legislation, detentions of political figures, intense global conflicts. And I want to be clear, we are not here to take sides or endorse any specific viewpoint.
Right. Our mission is purely analytical. We're just here to impartially map the mechanics of what is actually happening on the ground.
Exactly. So where do we start?
Well, instead of just reading headlines, we're going to connect the dots across 5 major pillars. We're looking at the Constitution and polity, internal security, tech regulation, infrastructure and environment, and finally, geopolitics. And honestly, the best place to start seeing how these boundaries are being redrawn is from within.
Within the country itself.
Right. Look at how the foundational legal structure of the state, the Constitution, is being actively reinterpreted right now.
Which brings us to the Uniform Civil Code, the UCC.
Yeah, a massive development there.
The Madhya Pradesh government just set up a high-level committee. It's chaired by former Supreme Court Judge Ranjana Prasad Desai, and they have a very tight 60-day deadline to draft a UCC bill.
Right. The goal seems to be rolling this out by Diwali.
But let's look at the mechanics here. I mean, why is the state government pushing so aggressively to standardize laws around marriage, divorce, inheritance?
Because personal laws in India have historically been tied to religious identity. So by pushing for a uniform civil code, the state is attempting to fundamentally alter the citizen-state contract.
How so?
Well, the legal philosophy here is that the state should interact with an individual strictly as a citizen, rather than as a member of a specific religious community.
Okay, that makes sense.
So standardizing inheritance, for example, closes these really complex loopholes that vary wildly between different faiths, theoretically creating a more streamlined, albeit, highly debated, civic architecture.
Yeah, because the boundaries between religion and the state are always volatile.
Always.
And the Supreme Court is actively trying to draw a very rigid line there right now. There's a 9-judge bench that just made a fascinating observation regarding Article 25(2) of the Constitution.
Right, the one that guarantees the right to freedom of religion.
Yeah. And the distinction the court drew is just crucial for understanding modern governance.
They noted that a religious denomination has absolute autonomy over its beliefs and the manner of its worship. But, and this is key, the secular activities associated with those practices are completely subject to state regulation.
Give me a practical example of that. Like, how do you actually separate the religious practice from the secular activity?
So the court used the example of blocking public roads for a religious festival. The belief driving the festival. Totally protected.
Right.
But the logistical act of putting a tent on a public highway and causing a 10-mile traffic jam, that is a secular issue of public infrastructure.
Ah, I see.
The state has the absolute authority to regulate that physical space. Basically, your right to worship does not override the public's right to functional infrastructure.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it all comes down to where an individual's rights end and public order begins, which leads directly into the most intense boundary issue we found in the sources, which is preventive detention.
Yes, the use of the Public Safety Act, the PSA in Jammu and Kashmir.
Right. On one hand, the High Court just quashed the detention of an AAP MLA who had been held for 8 months.
And the court's reasoning there focused heavily on the definition of a threat. They explicitly stated that ordinary law and order issues cannot simply be reclassified as public order threats.
Just to justify locking someone up without a trial.
Exactly.
But then at the very same time, in Sopor, families are protesting the PSA detentions of 6 young men.
Right, following that local school protest.
Yeah, about the alleged harassment of a girl by a teacher. The families are claiming these guys were just bystanders picking up their siblings, but the police are arguing there is sufficient evidence that they were disturbing public order.
It's a really stark contrast.
So, I mean, is this legal distinction between law and order and public order actually a practical safeguard? Or is it just semantic gymnastics that allows the state to detain people whenever it feels threatened?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the judiciary actually recognizes that the line is dangerously blurry, which is exactly why they are increasingly demanding objective data over subjective assumptions.
So they want proof.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the case of the MLA, the court looked at the actual data of the alleged offenses and determined they just didn't meet the threshold of destabilizing the state. It's a pushback against the casual use of draconian laws. The legal system is recognizing that when you strip away a citizen's ultimate liberties, you can't just rely on the subjective feelings of local law enforcement.
And we are seeing that exact same demand for objective data in the Supreme Court's latest mandate regarding the death penalty.
This is a massive shift in criminal justice procedure.
Yeah. The Supreme Court has mandated a new framework requiring trial courts to actively call for a comprehensive mitigation investigation report before sentencing someone to death.
Because historically, mitigating circumstances like a convict's background or trauma, or their potential for reform, those were often totally ignored by the trial court.
They were just skipped.
Pretty much. They were only really considered years later during the appeals process at the High Court or Supreme Court.
Which meant trial judges were handing down the ultimate irreversible punishment based on an incomplete data set.
Exactly. So by forcing trial courts to gather this objective, verified data about the convict's life before the sentence is pronounced, the judiciary is trying to ensure that reformative principles aren't just treated as an afterthought in capital cases.
Speaking of irreversible decisions, the Supreme Court is also currently reviewing how the medical and legal systems actually certify death.
Right, specifically brain death under the Transplantation of Human Organs Act.
Yeah, because the current standard practice often relies heavily on the apnea test.
Essentially, doctors take a patient off a ventilator for a brief period.
Just to see if the brainstem triggers an independent breath.
Yeah. But an activist is petitioning the court to mandate more advanced technology, specifically EEG tests to measure electrical activity and brain angiograms.
Because an angiogram physically maps the blood flow in the brain.
Exactly. The argument is that an angiogram provides undeniable, objective visual evidence that the blood supply to the brain is completely stopped.
Right, whereas the apnea test is more observation.
Yeah, it has subjective clinical elements. And if blood is still flowing, brain cells might actually still be alive. So when the state authorizes the harvesting of organs, the petitioner argues it cannot rely on subjective observation. It needs foolproof, objective data.
But here's the friction. The courts can mandate all the objective data they want, but when legal definitions fail to deter actual kinetic threats, the state has to rely on hard, active law enforcement.
Because the internal security apparatus is fighting threats that just don't respect legal jurisdictions.
At all. I mean, look at the recent blast on a railway freight corridor in Patiala, Punjab.
The details of that incident are chilling. The deceased bomber, Jagrip Singh, was highly radicalized, wearing a traditional Nihang robe.
Right. But the investigation traced the entire pro-Khalistan terror module directly back to handlers operating out of Malaysia.
So the threat materializes on a local railway track.
But the command and control structure is sitting comfortably across the ocean. The border didn't protect the railway line.
No, it didn't.
And we are seeing the exact same dynamic in the narcotics trade. The Narcotics Control Bureau has launched this massive 3-year Operation Global Hunt.
Right, targeting top drug fugitives globally.
Yeah, and they recently secured the extradition of a Dawood Ibrahim aide from Turkey.
That's the macro-level response, right?
Yeah.
But what is truly fascinating is the micro-level response happening simultaneously.
In Jammu and Kashmir.
Yes. Local police have adopted a highly controversial public shaming tactic. They are putting up rogue galleries, these bulletin boards, with the names and photos of accused drug peddlers at local police stations.
Wait, displaying photos of accused peddlers like they haven't been convicted?
Correct. Just accused.
Yeah.
To try and break the neighborhood supply chains.
How does that not completely obliterate the presumption of innocence? I mean, how is a state agency legally getting away with public shaming before securing a conviction in court?
It really highlights the sheer desperation of local law enforcement. I mean, they are trying to destroy the social capital of these individuals within their own communities because the formal judicial process is simply too slow to stop the daily flow of fentanyl and heroin.
Wow.
It is an extreme, highly questionable tactic born out of the complete failure of standard policing.
And standard policing is completely failing when it comes to the epidemic of cyber fraud, too.
Oh, absolutely.
We are seeing these terrifying digital arrests where scammers, often operating from offshore call centers, pose as law enforcement officials on video calls.
And they coerce victims into transferring their entire life savings.
It's awful. And the Decision Center realizes they can't just arrest their way out of this problem because the perpetrators are outside Indian jurisdiction.
So they told the Supreme Court they are focusing on structural defenses. First, they are considering the Reserve Bank of India's proposal for temporary debit holds on suspicious accounts.
The mechanism there is brilliant. Right now, once a victim transfers the money, it is instantaneously split and routed through dozens of mule accounts.
Disappearing in seconds.
Yeah, but a temporary debit hold essentially acts as a circuit breaker. It freezes the transaction at the first hop before it can be dispersed.
And to stop those mule accounts from being created in the first place, they are pushing for a Biometric Identity Verification System.
The BIVS.
Right, to track SIM card issuance across all telecom operators.
So, with biometric SIM tracking stopping the fake accounts and debit holds breaking the speed of the transactions, it sounds like the government is finally installing a high-tech bouncer at the door of the banking system rather than just sending the police to chase the thieves after they've already robbed the club.
That is exactly it. It's the necessary evolution of security. Transnational threats require infrastructure-level defenses. You have to build the security into the architecture of the network itself.
But the paradox is that the very same digital networks carrying this fraud are also the engines of our modern economy.
Very true.
The government isn't just trying to block criminals. They are heavily regulating legitimate tech companies. Like last year, the IT ministry effectively banned real money gaming apps like Dream11 and MPL.
But the sheer amount of money in that industry means the banned entities are highly incentivized to find workarounds.
Right. And the government is currently on high alert because they suspect these platforms are tweaking their models to sneak back in under the legal umbrella of eSports.
Which places a heavy compliance burden on actual eSports. Because the law states that if the outcome relies predominantly on physical dexterity, mental agility, or strategic thinking, it qualifies as a legitimate esport.
But if the prize pot is determined by factors of chance,
then it's illegal wagering. And it is incredibly difficult for regulators to monitor that line in real-time software.
Yeah, they are essentially trying to legislate the mechanics of user engagement.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Changing how users engage with technology is exactly what Silicon Valley is attempting right now.
Oh, the AI smartphone rumors?
Yes. The sources are buzzing that OpenAI, in collaboration with legendary Apple designer Jony, is developing a new AI-native smartphone.
And analyst Ming-Chi Kuo is predicting this device won't even use traditional apps.
Right. It will rely entirely on AI agents that autonomously execute tasks for you. But, I mean, let's be real for a second. If all the heavy lifting and AI processing happens on servers in the cloud anyway, does the physical phone even matter? Or is OpenAI just trying to build a hardware moat to lock us into their subscription ecosystem?
What's fascinating here is that the hardware might just be the Trojan horse. But the behavioral shift it represents is profound.
How so?
We are transitioning from a world of passive consumption, where you just scroll through a grid of apps, to a world of active delegation, where you command an AI agent to navigate the digital world on your behalf.
The tech industry is trying to automate our daily friction.
Exactly. Just like the government has to distinguish between a passive video game and an active betting platform, the tech industry is shifting from passive app scrolling to active AI-driven task completion.
It is incredibly ironic, though, that Silicon Valley is building AI agents to autonomously navigate the digital world because, back in the physical world, a citizen has to fight a legal war just to install an EV charger in their own basement.
That is the perfect encapsulation of India's current infrastructure paradox.
Right. The state is pushing rapid modernization, but it constantly collides with localized friction. Let's look at the scale of this modernization. The 6th National Family Health Survey, NFHS-6, is rolling out its results in May.
A massive undertaking.
Over 6.7 lakh households. But this time they use digital KPI software. That's computer-assisted personal interviewing. Why does moving from paper clipboards to digital tablets actually matter at a national level?
Because real-time data collection fundamentally changes how a government can respond. Instead of waiting years to tabulate paper surveys, digital KPI software allows health ministries to instantly spot localized spikes in lifestyle diseases.
Or post-COVID complications.
Right, before they become national epidemics. It creates a dynamic, actionable baseline for the nation's health.
And you need massive data to manage massive physical development, like the Ganga Expressway in UP that was just inaugurated.
Oh, that is a massive infra push.
A 594-kilometer, 6-lane behemoth connecting Meerut to Prayagraj, costing over 36,000 crore rupees. It even features a 3.5-kilometer airstrip specifically designed for fighter jets.
It is a profound projection of state capacity. Building a 600-kilometer concrete artery spurs the economy immensely.
But when that macro-level ambition trickles down to green technology, it hits a brick wall.
Right. Fighting climate change requires localized battles.
Yeah, case in point. Haryana is having to actively amend its state building codes just to mandate higher-density EV charging points in residential basements.
And meanwhile, the Supreme Court is currently hearing a plea from a man in Greater Noida
who had to sue his own residential society because the management committee flatly refused to let him install an EV charger in his assigned parking spot.
The macro policy to fight climate change is being derailed by micro-level NIMBism in apartment parking lots. And this friction between human development and the natural world is everywhere in the sources. The Supreme Court recently upheld the relocation of spotted deer from an overcrowded park in Housekhaz, Delhi, to tiger reserves in Rajasthan.
Simply because the urban park had wildly exceeded its ecological carrying capacity.
Exactly. You can try to manage nature, but eventually nature just ignores your paperwork.
Just like the Great Indian Bustard. Officials in Gujarat were tracking a critically endangered chick. They set up perimeters, deployed guards to protect it from feral dogs, drafted all these conservation protocols.
And then
they realized they couldn't protect it from everything because the month-old chick learned how to fly. It literally just flew out of their heavily regulated protective zone.
That's a great reminder that you cannot legislate the boundaries of the natural world.
No, you can't.
And increasingly, you cannot legislate the boundaries of economics either. Look at the ripple effects of Indonesia's new B50 biofuel policy.
Oh man, this one hits every kitchen in India.
It really does.
So Indonesia is mandating that more of its domestic palm oil be diverted to create its own B50 biofuel. And since India imports about $8.5 billion worth of palm oil annually, over 50% from Indonesia.
That immediately tightens the global supply.
Yeah, it's basically like Indonesia decided to eat its own lunch instead of selling it, and now India has to pay premium surge pricing at the global cafeteria just to fry our samosas.
It perfectly illustrates how development is a constant trade-off. India can build the Ganga Expressway, but it cannot stop a global biofuel policy from pushing up edible oil prices on Indian dinner tables.
Every local action creates a global reaction, which brings us to the ultimate arena where these reactions play out. Geopolitics.
Because that Indonesian ripple effect proves that local economics are intrinsically tied to the international order.
Right. And right now, the sources show that order is fracturing. Like, Indian Airlines are currently begging the government to reinstate a crack ban between $12 and $22 on aviation turbine fuel.
Because a crack ban is essentially a protective price ceiling. Airlines want the government to cap the margins of oil refineries so that the wild price swings of global crude oil aren't passed directly onto them.
They need that shield because the global energy market is chaotic right now, largely due to a massive geopolitical shock. The UAE just announced it is quitting OPEC and OPEC plus A.
Quitting the most powerful energy cartel on Earth.
Why? I mean, what triggered that?
It comes down to a fundamental disagreement over capacity and power. The UAE has invested billions into expanding its oil production infrastructure. But Saudi Arabia's strict production quotas are forcing them to keep that oil in the ground. Furthermore, the UAE is furious about the lack of military support from their Gulf allies amid the ongoing Iran war and the targeted attacks on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz.
The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is a terrifying breakdown of international norms. For centuries, global trade has relied on the concept of mare liberum, the open seas.
The idea that seas are free for navigation.
Exactly. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, specifically guarantees transit passage rights. But right now, those legal guarantees are meaningless.
The editorials highlight how UNCLS is yielding entirely to brute military force. It is what happens when legacy frameworks fail to protect the interests of the nations that rely on them.
And India is loudly pointing out these failures on the global stage. At the the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Defense Ministers meeting in Bishkek, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh explicitly called out the double standards on terrorism.
He demanded that the SEO actually take concrete action against member states that actively shelter terrorist networks.
So India is demanding accountability, but there is a growing consensus that some of these institutions might just be beyond reform.
Right. The UN General Assembly President, Annalena Baerbock, was recently in India. She took a dig at U.S. President Trump's Board of Peace idea, while strongly aligning with New Delhi on the urgent need to expand and reform the UN Security Council ahead of the UN-80 session.
But so, what does this all mean? Let's apply some mechanical logic to this UNSC reform push. The UN was fundamentally built on post-WWII power dynamics.
Yes, it was.
So asking the permanent 5 members to dilute their own veto power by letting India and Germany in, isn't that a bit like asking turkeys to vote for Thanksgiving? I mean, why would they ever agree to share that power?
This raises an important question. Historically, they don't. And that is exactly why maritime law is breaking down in the Middle East right now.
Because the institutions are stuck.
Exactly. When legacy institutions stubbornly refuse to share power like OPEC with the UAE or the UNSC with Indian nations, don't just politely accept their marginal status, they abandon those institutions. Or they rely on unilateral force to secure their interests.
Wow. We have covered an incredible amount of ground today. From the intricate legal mechanisms of the Uniform Civil Code in Madhya Pradesh to the biometric bouncers protecting our banking systems, all the way to the collapse of maritime law in the Strait of Hormuz.
It's a lot to process.
It is. We really hope that this deep dive has left you feeling fully prepped, whether for a UPSC exam or just to understand the rapidly changing world around you.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. The through line of all these sources is the ultimate paradox of the modern nation-state.
What's that?
Well, we are watching countries fight fiercely for absolute local sovereignty, like the UAE leaving OPEC to control its own oil, or India fighting to control its digital borders against cyber fraud. Yet, despite all these massive efforts to build higher walls, a single biofuel policy in Indonesia or a blocked strait in the Middle East can instantly disrupt India's aviation and food sectors.
It's all connected.
It is. Moving forward, the most successful nations won't be the ones that build the highest walls, but the ones that master the delicate art of global interdependence without sacrificing their own security.
Because, as we noted at the very beginning, those solid black lines on the map, they're an illusion. The walls are porous, and the world is already inside. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives, keep looking for the mechanisms behind the headlines, and we can't wait to explore the next stack of sources with you.